How many times does something need to fail before someone calls it a safety hazard? And who gets to decide which failures actually matter? Quick note before we begin. This is a fictional, dramatized story for education and entertainment. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental. This story is inspired by common HOA situations people talk about online. All names and details here are fictional. Jennifer Martinez had installed a trampoline in her backyard 3 months ago, the kind with the safety net enclosure that cost an extra $200 because she'd read every article about trampoline injuries and wanted the safer option. And her daughter Sophia spent hours out there every afternoon after school, jumping and laughing in a way that made Jennifer feel like she'd made at least one parenting decision correctly. The trampoline sat 15 feet from the fence line, fully enclosed in their private backyard, not visible from the street, installed according to manufacturer specifications on level ground with proper clearance from trees and structures. Jennifer had even called her homeowner's insurance to verify it wouldn't affect their coverage, and the agent had said as long as it had the safety enclosure and they maintained it properly, there was no issue. So when the violation notice arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, citing Section 8.2 of the CC and RS regarding recreational equipment posing liability risks to the community, Jennifer stood in her kitchen, reading it 3 times, trying to understand what community risk a trampoline in her fenced backyard could possibly create. What makes selective safety enforcement particularly revealing is how it exposes what people actually care about versus what they claim to care about. The notice gave her 14 days to remove the trampoline or face daily fines of $50, and it was signed by Diane Crawford, the HOA's Volunteer Safety Committee chair, a 58-year-old woman with a narrow face, sharp gray-blue eyes behind designer glasses, platinum blonde hair in a precise cut, and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she'd never met a rule she didn't want to enforce on someone else. Jennifer's first instinct was to comply, to avoid conflict, to just take the trampoline down, and maybe sell it on Facebook Marketplace, and tell Sophia they'd go to the park more often instead. Her husband Carlos, a 38-year-old electrician with warm brown eyes and the same conflict-avoidant temperament as his wife, suggested maybe they could talk to Diane reasonably, explain that it was safe, that Sophia loved it, that it wasn't hurting anyone. But their neighbor Marcus Johnson, a 42-year-old construction worker with kind dark brown eyes and a square, strong jawline who'd lived in the neighborhood for 12 years, came over that evening after seeing Jennifer looking stressed in the driveway and asked what was wrong. When she showed him the notice, Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He said, "Jennifer, you know the community pool gate has been broken for 6 months, right? The latch doesn't catch. Kids can push it open. I've reported it 4 times to the HOA and nothing's happened. And that rusty decorative gate at the entrance to the walking path, the one that's literally falling off its hinges and has exposed metal edges, that's been like that for over a year." Jennifer had walked past that gate dozens of times, had noticed it was damaged, had even thought vaguely that someone should fix it before a kid ran into it, but she'd never connected it to the HOA's responsibility, had never thought about it in the context of safety enforcement. Marcus continued, "Last month my daughter cut her hand on that gate trying to close it because it was swinging in the wind. 5 stitches. I filed a formal complaint with the board. Diane told me it was on the repair list, but they had to prioritize based on available funds. Yet they've got time to measure your trampoline's distance from the fence." Jennifer felt something shift in her chest. Not quite anger yet, but the beginning of clarity. She asked Marcus if he'd be willing to put what he'd told her in writing, and he said he'd do better than that. He'd been taking photos of every safety issue he reported because his construction background made him notice these things, and he had a whole folder on his phone. That night, Jennifer drafted an email to the HOA board that took her 90 minutes to write because she kept softening her language, removing anything that might sound confrontational, but what she finally sent was a request for clarification on the safety standards being applied, noted that her trampoline met manufacturer safety specifications and insurance requirements, was located in a private fenced backyard not accessible to other residents, and politely inquired whether the board had conducted a comprehensive safety audit of common areas, given that CC&R Section 8.2 appeared to prioritize community-wide liability risks. She attached photos Marcus had provided showing the broken pool gate, the damaged walking path gate, a cracked section of sidewalk that was a clear tripping hazard, and a playground swing with a rusted chain. Diane's response came back in less than 2 hours, which should have told Jennifer something. The email said the trampoline violated community standards regardless of safety features, that backyard equipment was different from common area maintenance, that the board had discretion to prioritize repairs based on budget constraints, and that Jennifer's 14-day compliance period was not negotiable. There was no mention of the specific safety issues Jennifer had raised, no acknowledgement of the broken gates, no explanation of why a trampoline in a private yard created more liability than a broken pool gate that children could access unsupervised. Jennifer sat at her kitchen table with Carlos, and for the first time in their marriage, she said she wasn't going to back down, that something about this felt fundamentally wrong, that if the HOA wanted to enforce safety rules, they needed to enforce them consistently, especially when actual hazards existed that could hurt any child in the neighborhood, not just her daughter. Carlos, who'd spent their entire relationship being the one who suggested compromise, nodded and said, "What do you need me to do?" Jennifer called a lawyer the next morning, not because she wanted to sue anyone, but because she needed to understand her legal position before the 14-day deadline. The attorney, a woman named Patricia Vance, who'd handled several HOA disputes, listened to the situation and said 3 things that Jennifer wrote down word for word. 1. Selective enforcement of rules is legally problematic for HOAs, especially when the selection appears arbitrary or targeted. 2. If an HOA claims to enforce safety rules but demonstrably ignores actual safety hazards in common areas they're responsible for maintaining, that creates a liability exposure they're trying to avoid through selective enforcement. 3. Jennifer's trampoline likely didn't violate the CC and RS as written because Section 8.2 specifically referenced community liability risks, and equipment in a private fenced backyard accessible only to the homeowner's family didn't meet that standard. Patricia drafted a response letter to the HOA that Jennifer read 4 times before agreeing to send because it felt more confrontational than anything she'd ever done, but every statement in it was factual and reasonable. The letter noted the legal issues with selective enforcement, requested copies of all safety complaints filed in the past 2 years and the board's responses to them, pointed out that the CC and RS require the HOA to maintain common areas in safe condition, and offered to attend the next board meeting to discuss establishing consistent safety standards that would actually protect the community. The letter also mentioned that Jennifer had consulted with her insurance carrier, who confirmed the trampoline didn't affect her coverage, and that she'd be happy to provide proof of proper installation and maintenance. And then Patricia added 1 paragraph that Jennifer knew would either resolve this or make it much worse, stating that given the documented safety hazards in common areas that the board had failed to address despite multiple resident complaints, any enforcement action against Jennifer's compliant trampoline while leaving actual hazards unrepaired could constitute discriminatory enforcement and would likely not withstand legal scrutiny. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. If you're finding value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you've ever experienced a similar HOA or neighborhood situation, feel free to share your story in the comments. The board meeting happened on a Thursday evening in the community center, and Jennifer attended with Carlos, Marcus, and a binder that Patricia had helped her organize containing photos, complaint records, insurance documentation, and copies of the relevant CC&R sections. Diane sat at the front table with 4 other board members, and when Jennifer's name came up on the agenda under Violation Appeals, Diane started by reading the original notice and emphasizing the board's responsibility to minimize community liability. Jennifer, hands shaking slightly because public speaking made her nauseous, stood up and calmly presented her case. She showed the photos of the broken gates, explained that her neighbor's daughter had required stitches from one of them, noted that multiple residents had filed complaints about these hazards with no action taken, and pointed out that her trampoline in her private backyard created 0 risk to other community members while the broken pool gate posed a drowning hazard. She kept her tone respectful, kept her facts clear, and when Diane tried to interrupt to say that budget limitations required prioritizing repairs, Jennifer said softly but clearly, "Then why is enforcing my trampoline removal a priority when fixing a gate that injured a child isn't?" One of the other board members, a man named Robertson who Jennifer had never spoken to before, shifted in his seat and said, "Diane, do we actually have documentation of when these common area complaints were filed and what our response timeline was?" Diane's face tightened, and she said that information wasn't relevant to Jennifer's violation. And Robert said, actually, I think it's very relevant because if we're claiming safety is our priority, but we're not addressing documented hazards in areas we're responsible for maintaining, we've got a problem that's bigger than one trampoline. The meeting devolved into a tense discussion between board members about liability, repair budgets, and enforcement consistency. And Jennifer sat down and watched it happen, watched Diane try to control the narrative while other board members started asking questions they apparently hadn't asked before. The vote on Jennifer's violation appeal was 4-1 to rescind the notice, with Diane voting against, and Robert made a motion to conduct a comprehensive safety audit of all common areas within 30 days and develop a prioritized repair schedule, which passed unanimously. But here's where the moral irony becomes almost too perfect. 6 weeks later, Diane was walking her small dog on the community path when the rusty decorative gate that had been on the repair list for over a year swung loose in the wind and struck her in the shoulder, tearing her jacket and leaving a bruise that, according to neighborhood gossip, required a doctor's visit. Diane filed a formal complaint with her own board about the gate, was told it was scheduled for repair but budget priorities had delayed it, and according to Marcus, who served on the repair committee, her face went white when she realized she was hearing her own words played back to her. The gate was repaired within a week. So was the pool gate, and the cracked sidewalk, and 3 other issues from the safety audit that residents had been complaining about for months. Jennifer's trampoline stayed exactly where it was. Sophia still jumps on it every afternoon. And Jennifer learned that sometimes avoiding conflict doesn't keep the peace. It just lets the wrong people define what matters. The thing about selective enforcement masquerading as safety concern is that most people don't recognize the hypocrisy until they're standing in their kitchen, holding a violation notice, while their neighbor's child has stitches from a hazard the same HOA ignored. That's the whole reason this channel exists. If you found something useful here today, a like costs you nothing and helps us keep going. Subscribe and hit the bell. We post every week, and we don't waste your time. See you next story.